911. Where's your emergency?
This is Alex Murdaugh at 4147 Moselle Road. I need the police to ambulance immediately. My wife and child have just got badly.
Okay, you said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Sir?
You said 4147 Moselle Road in Allison?
Yes, sir. 4147 Moselle Road.
Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies starts now.
Today we're talking about part 1 in the Alex Murdaugh case and the Netflix documentary series. If you have not checked out this documentary series yet, it is great, and we are going to do part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. We're going to dig into everything that this series has brought forth. It's brought forth some new information that is not available in the court case. So let's get started. This series is being narrated mostly by Paul's girlfriend at the time, and her name is Mallory. There are 3 girls whose names start with the letter M involved in this documentary and involved in this case. First is Mallory. Mallory is the girl that died in the boating accident caused allegedly by Paul Murdoch. Morgan is the girlfriend or former girlfriend of Paul Murdoch prior to his death. And then we have Miley. Miley is a friend of Morgan and Mallory, and she speaks throughout this documentary. So Alex Murdaugh had 2 sons. He has an older son named Buster. Buster is alive and fine. And Paul. Now Alex Murdaugh is being accused of doing away with his wife Maggie and also his younger son Paul. Paul was driving the boat. Paul was the one that stood accused of bringing injury to Mallory. He was charged in the court case, but he got special treatment. He didn't have to go down to get his mug shot taken. Instead, it was taken in the hall in the courthouse. This family has especially been given very red carpet treatment, in my opinion. It just shows you that justice is not always equal for wealthy and well-connected individuals and regular working class Americans. Alex Murdaugh stands trial only for doing away with Paul and Maggie, but there are some other people that are in his orbit who also were done away with possibly, or whose deaths were very suspicious. One was his housekeeper, and I'm going to talk more about what happened to her in just a second, so please stay with me. Paul was driving under the influence, and according to the documentary, Paul was using the boat to avoid having to take a breathalyzer. So Paul was using this boat to skirt around law enforcement, in my opinion. Morgan is the narrator for much of the Netflix series, and I think her narration does a lot to humanize Paul, because let's face it, most of what we know about Paul is this boating accident. The documentary does a great job of describing how Paul was the scapegoat in his family. I've talked to you in the past about the dynamics between the scapegoat and the golden child. Buster was definitely the golden child. He was going to law school. He got into a fraternity. He was in college. And in contrast, Paul did not want to become a lawyer and follow in the footsteps of his father, his great-grandfather. For those of you who have been with Reporter Room for a while, we've delved into the whole narcissistic trap of the golden child versus the scapegoat in the family dynamics. And so you are probably very familiar with how those dynamics work. I will link some videos that might help you catch up in the comment section below. So as I've shared with you in the past, neither child comes out of this whole situation, neither the scapegoat or the golden child comes out of this unscathed. So according to Morgan, Paul was the family scapegoat, and this family had a lot of financial upkeep. They were multi-generational wealthy, but apparently a lot of that wealth was wiped out in the Great Recession of 2008. Alex Murdaugh had an image to keep up. They had multiple houses and large properties. For example, the hunting property where Maggie and Paul were shot was called Moselle, and it consisted of over 1,000 acres. The Netflix documentary also does a great job of humanizing Mallory. She was the young woman who was killed in the boating accident when Paul was allegedly driving that boat. One of the things that stood out to me, and listening to Paul's girlfriend Morgan describe the Moselle property, was this airplane landing strip. What was getting brought in on an airplane? There was also a large outbuilding that housed the airplane, and apparently it was driven in and out and stored there. So one of the producers asked Paul's friend, what was it on the plane? And he said, quote, the way Paul told it, it was for everything you could imagine. Medications, and I'm watching my words here, and women who didn't have their clothes on. He qualifies this by sharing that you cannot believe everything that Paul says, but it does make us wonder what was on that plane, especially when you consider the fact that Alex Murdaugh checked himself into a rehab facility for addiction to avoid being arrested. Now we know that Alex Murdaugh was stealing money from his law firm and his own clients, allegedly. What other avenues was Alex seeking to make money to support his lavish lifestyle and his addiction? Was he running, and I'm watching my words here, something in and out of Moselle using that airplane? Another thing I found extremely interesting is that Paul's girlfriend Morgan describes Alex, who is on trial for doing away with Maggie and Paul, his wife and son, as very permissive. Morgan also describes a time during a watermelon festival when she and Paul were allowed to go to the firm where Alex Murdaugh worked, and where the law firm and partners of Alex Murdaugh offered Paul and her alcohol and also other children of Alex's law partner. So this is all alleged, but I'm sure Netflix has vetted out this source. Morgan also describes the age of the minors who were being provided alcohol by Alex Murdaugh and his law firm partners, allegedly. She says that she and the other people were between 14 and 16 years old. I'm going to talk about the Kiely Rodni case in just a moment, so please stay with us. Everything I'm sharing with you today is my opinion, and opinions are not facts, so please don't send any negativity to anyone, anytime, anywhere. Let's be kind to each other. This video is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and give this video a thumbs up so I know you were here. Most of us believe that someone would be held accountable in the Kiely Rodni case and that arrests would be made. And although law enforcement says that this case is ongoing, I think now that this is just a stalling tactic. In both of these cases, underage drinking is what led to the death of a young person. In the Kiely Rodni case, it led to the death of Kiely. In the boating accident, it led to the death of Mallory. So Morgan describes the Murdaughs as being very heavy drinkers. It sounds like alcohol played a major role in their household, and contrast this with her family, Morgan's family, who didn't drink much at all. She must have been very surprised. She also describes that it was okay with Paul's parents that she and Paul had alcohol, even though they were underage, still in high school. And she describes herself drinking very heavily at this point in her life. She also describes Paul as becoming a completely different person when drinking. I don't think that this is an unusual scenario. What do you guys think? Because I think many people have encountered loved ones who become completely different when they're intoxicated. In fact, Morgan describes the fact that when Paul became drunk, that he had an alter ego that they called Timmy. She said that Anthony Cook actually gave Paul the nickname, and it was apparently Paul, his alter ego, Timmy, who was not very nice. So it sounds like Paul was a mean drunk, and again, he was a minor and shouldn't have had alcohol. This reminds me so much of the Kiely Rodni case, because in that case we also had minors being able to access things that they shouldn't have been able to access, including alcohol, with no accountability or consequences in that case. Who provided Kiely with the alcohol that caused her to become so intoxicated that she drove into the lake and passed? No one has been held accountable in that case, and it reminds me so much of this case with Paul Murdaugh. With what happened to Mallory, no one has been held accountable in this case either. But I think it's important that we understand the dynamics that were in play in this family in an effort to get at the truth of what happened to Maggie and Paul, and also Gloria, the housekeeper. So one of the dynamics that Morgan describes is the golden child scapegoat family dynamic, where Maggie just wasn't as loving toward Paul as she was toward Buster, who was her oldest child. Is this why Paul was drinking so heavily? According to Morgan, Buster aspired to have a similar life to his father and grandfather. He went to law school, he was in a fraternity, he was working to follow in their footsteps, and Maggie, quote, ate it up. So Morgan describes Paul as not wanting to be a lawyer and also describes him as the, quote, black sheep of the family. Morgan's parents describe Paul's drinking, and it sounds like Morgan tried to alert Maggie, Paul's mom, to what was going on with him. Her concerns about Paul were completely shut down by Paul's mom, Maggie. She was dismissed. Morgan does a wonderful job describing the relationship between Paul and his former housekeeper, Gloria. It sounds like they were very, very close. According to Morgan, Gloria had been involved in raising him since Paul was just 2 years old. So it would have been a blow to Paul. And it makes me wonder if what happened to Gloria, because what happened on the steps of the Murdaugh family home that led to Gloria's passing would have maybe been known by Paul and also Maggie. And is this a motive in the case of Alex Murdaugh? Did Paul suspect something untoward happened to Gloria, and did this lead to him being intoxicated on a regular basis? Was he masking his feelings behind alcohol? Paul's friend Anthony describes Gloria as being one of the best people you would ever meet, and Morgan described her as taking care of Paul, and it sounds like Gloria did raise Paul from the age of 2 onward. Morgan describes Mallory, the young woman who passed away in the boating accident, and Paul's relationship as Mallory, quote, tolerating Paul. Morgan also describes a lot of people being leery of Paul because of his reckless behavior, and the other young woman, girl, who was in the boat that night was named Miley. And Miley was the other young woman on the boat that night, and she was friends with Morgan and Mallory. So after you're done watching the trial live on TV, I hope you'll join me for this 4-part series doing a deep dive into the Netflix documentary. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Subscribe,